Okay, so who's here for the first time today? This is your first day of the conference. Anybody? No. That's why Vicky was saying I've been recommending restaurants since I live 20 miles that way. So what we're going to do is we have a panel now on 5G trends and collaborations, which, of course, we've been talking about for a little while now, but we're going to kind of dive into this. And what I'm going to do is we kind of structured this a little differently from the other ones. So we took the panelists' presentations and we sliced them all up. And so we get one slide. We're kind of going to move through the different speakers at different times, okay? We are going to have time for questions from the audience. And I'll stop every so often and see if there's any questions as we move through that way, okay? So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to very quickly just introduce the panel, and then we'll kind of get into things. So Dr. Colin Willcock is 5G IA, he with the tie.
Indeed.
Indeed. Dr. Wei is from the China Academy of Information and Communication Technology. Dr. Satoh is from 5GMF. Professor Lee, 5G Forum. Dr. Brito down the end there, hi, from 5G Brazil Project. And Chris Pearson from 5G Americas. Now, I did ask Chris last week if he could go and get himself a PhD or a professorship before the panel, because he does kind of stand out there a little bit. But those of you know, I've known Chris for many, many, many years, and I knew he could take that, so...
I got a master's, but not a PhD.
You got a master's, there you go. Only got a master's, there you go. Okay, so let's see. So what we're going to do is, firstly, we're going to talk about 5G trials. Okay, then we're going to get into 5G commercialization activities. So I realized the previous panel was talking about the trials. We're going to talk about a few different things from the different regions. But we are going to talk then about commercialization activities for 5G, which obviously is very important. And then we'll talk with for the interregional activities, which obviously is very important. There was a panel I was on this morning, and I asked them, you know, what's the biggest concern you have? And they said coordination of spectrum around the world to bring down the cost of CPE. So the interregional activity here obviously is very important. Then we'll wrap things up, okay? Introductions we already did. So let's talk about trials first. And then what I'm going to do is ask each panelist and to go and just tell us quickly about the trials that we have in their particular region, and I'm giving them each 1 minute. So the clock's starting here, and so first is 5GMF, who's got 5GMF? Right, yeah, Dr. Satoh, please. Thank you. Good to see you there.
Thank you, Iain. This shows our midterm action plan towards 2020. Our activities are in line with the development schedule in ITU and 3GPP. In addition, our activity have already changed from vision and concept study to the practical implementation of 5G, including the field trial and spectrum harmonization, aiming to commercialize the 5G mobile communication system before the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games to be held in 2020. As Mr. Nakazato, MSC Japan has already presented in the morning panel session, Japanese MIC they commenced the 5G comprehensive field trial as nationwide with the schedule of the 3 years from May this last year. 6 the projects are ongoing field trial in Tokyo and local area in Japan based upon the 5G trial report, including concept, the contents and the plan of the 5G field trial. The material has already, including the our initial result of the 5G comprehensive field trial. This is a booklet, which was distributed to the several desks. I have the several the remaining the booklets so far. If interested in the colleagues, please let me know. That's my the outline of the our field trial. Thank you.
Great. So I have one question for you. The 2019 Rugby World Cup in Tokyo. Mm-hmm. Can you get tickets? Huh?
Okay, so
yeah,
please
we will
let me
talk.
know. I will.
Okay. Okay, so I think my slides are out of order here. Is this yours,
yeah.
Dr. Will?
And
yes?
okay.
Yeah.
This letter is a China 5G trial roadmap, and on the whole, we divided the 5G trial into 2 spheres. And the first sphere we call the technology research and development trial, and from 2016 to 2018. And the second sphere we call the product research and development trial from 2018 to 2020. And the first sphere we are organized by MT 2020 5G promotion group. And our aim is to promote the 5G key technology research and development trial, verify the 5G scheme, and support the international standard and promote the development of a 5G industry. And this is our aim of the first spheres. And up to now, we have already completed the step 1 and step 2 test, and the step 3 test is ongoing. And the second sphere is product research and development trial. It will be dominated by operators in China. And its aim is to optimize the product performance and verify the network planning and improve the industrial maturity and accumulated experience of commercialization deployment. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So interestingly, the previous panel, Dr. Lee was talking about Open RAN and being dominated by the operators, and you have that as your last point. So interesting. Okay, good. Where are you, Dr. Willcock? There you are. Okay.
Yeah, let me take this one.
Yeah.
Not necessarily easy when we just had a panel discussing this in detail that I'm meant to 5 minutes later discuss it. But this is a slightly different view onto this trial roadmap. And I guess this trial roadmap shows that in Europe we're doing things in a slightly different way. So rather than having a very simple diagram, I've chosen to have a very complex diagram with lots of vertical and parallel things. And really the reason that we need this and the reason why we're investing effort actually developing this trial roadmap is because of the heterogeneous set of activities going on in Europe. So there's no single event which is driving 5G. There's no single centralized government, although I'm sure my friends from the European Commission would like that to happen in the future. But at the moment, we have 27 or 28 different countries all going in slightly different directions in terms of actual deployment and where they're going. But what the European Commission is doing is giving some sort of framework. And this trials roadmap is also a framework showing all the activities in 5G going on. But there are over 100 different trial activities in Europe going on or being planned. So a huge range of different activities, different vertical markets that they're addressing, different sort of backgrounds. Some are purely private trials, which are being driven by commercial trials. Some are more associated with the research programs coming from the European community, the 5G PPP. And some are more being driven perhaps from things like smart cities and things like that. So really just to show that there is a vast number of activities going on in Europe, trying to simply understand that landscape is quite challenging. and that is where this trial roadmap and the activities that the 5G Industry Association has done to create this roadmap, I believe, are very useful. It is available on the web to download and try and understand what's going on.
Good. So I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and there was a professor there from Munich University in Germany, and actually your fourth point on there, the vertical pilots, he was talking about some of the manufacturing work that's been going on, and there seems to be as much activity in Europe on the vertical manufacturing side, transportation side, whereas over, certainly what we've heard about the last few days, there's a lot of millimeter wave testing here to homes with the carriers, etc. But it seems to be that fourth bullet is the one that stood out to me. It's a little different here.
Yeah, maybe just comment on that. There tends to be, obviously different countries have different strengths. And if you look at somewhere like Germany, where I have the pleasure to live, is very strong on sort of, as you say, industry, machine tools, that sort of stuff, companies like Bosch and Siemens and all these sort of things. So for Germany, for example, Industry 4.0 is one of the things that they're pushing. Right. And they also build very fine cars, and obviously automotive is also a key thing which they're pushing. So you have the different strengths and flavours and directions of the different European countries, and you see that in this trials roadmap.
Yeah, good, great. Okay, who have we got here? Yeah, hi.
Okay, my name is Lee HyeonWoo, representing 5G Forum at this event. This slide shows our 5G protocol trial plan from this year, second half. As in the morning, the speaker from Korean side said that in Korea we will start the commercial service from March next year. So this trial plan is a little bit different, in parallel with the 5G commercial service. Because we already have several 5G trial for 5G itself already. So this trial is the 5G and with other verticals. So for the last 2 years, we investigate what can be the potential vertical areas, and we finally select the 5 areas called smart city and smart transportation and smart manufacturing and disaster relief and finally media. So we selected 5 areas. This trial is funded by the government, but actual project will be done by 4 operators and 1 research institute. For example, Smart City will be led by Korean institute called ETRI, Smart Transportation by Korea Telecom, Smart Manufacturing by SK Telecom, Disaster Relief by Korea Telecom, and Media by wireline operator is a subsidiary of SK Telecom called SK Broadband will doing the work. But as you know that these vertical areas are related with other ministries in Korea. For example, Smart City is mainly, Smart City itself is mainly driven by the Ministry of Land and Transportation. Also, smart transportation also led by Ministry of Land and Transportation. Manufacturing led by Ministry of Industry, Trade and Resources. Public safety by Ministry of Administration and Public Safety. And finally, media is handled by many Ministry of Culture and Tourism. So these verticals related to other ministry other than Ministry of Science and ICT. So doing the work, the 5G Forum is supporting and collaborating with them. So, inside 5G Forum, we have several committees. So each committee is mapped in each project, as you shown in the middle of the graph. So it will take 3 years from second half of this year until 2020, and we know that still some major vertical areas are missing. For example, e-health or smart energy is not in the list, but we will consider that vertical trial in next step. So that is a brief plan in Korea. Thank you.
So You said you have 5 trials being supported by the government. Does that mean they're paying? Do they put money in?
Yes, roughly, I think 80 million US dollar will be supported by the government.
Oh.
And some money from the private sector as well. So we have big money.
Who likes this idea? Yeah. That's good. That's good. Okay, Dr. Brito, I can't see you down there. There you go.
Okay, first of all, I would like to highlight that it is very important for 5G Brazil to consider the 5G with 4 scenarios. Could you put the slide, please?
They're not looking.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, let's go. First of all, I'd like to highlight that it's very important for 5G Brazil to consider the 5G with 4 scenarios, adding the 5G for remote areas instead of the traditional vision with 3 scenarios. I have some numbers to illustrate the importance of this point for us. In Brazil, the agribusiness is responsible by 23% of the GNP and 48% of the exportations. And we have about 60% of municipalities in rural areas. In addition, it's important to highlight too that separating people from information and communication technologies and services is no longer acceptable in contemporary society. And we still have 4 billion disconnected people in the world. Thus, we think that ubiquitous communications is the key point for 5G. In terms of trials, we are starting now our first trial in remote area using a GFDM modem developed at Inatel, as Professor Luciano said in the previous panel.
Okay, and I think later on, you've got some slides as well linking satellite with 5G, because obviously Brazil is a very large country with the population basically around the coast, right, in some big population centers, but it's kind of an interesting view you have of how it could develop later on.
Yeah, so. Satellite is very important to
we'll
cover the
we'll talk about that. Okay, so Chris, before we get into commercialization, since you are 5G Americas, right, and principally we've been here for a couple of days talking about 5G in the US with the US carriers, but and obviously you've got the partners here from around the world, but from an Americas point of view, what is your activity through the Americas region? Because obviously we've got the Caribbean and Latin America, Central America, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Well, I mean, I think when you look at the trials and different things in the Americas, it can't just be going down to one country or one area. So the U.S. has very much let the private sector move ahead with their trials, which we've seen. All the tier 1s as well as some of the tier 2s, operators have gone out there and done those trials on their own and so forth like that. And then you go into the different parts of the Americas, and José Otero is here at our conference, who's our director of Latin America and the Caribbean. It just depends on the country and what's going on there. So Brazil is a good example. They've been very active in the last 12 months to really get a good program going regarding 5G trials, and the same goes. It just depends on each of the countries of what's going on. Right. So it's as my Latin America directors have always said, it's not really a region, it's a lot of countries that are basically have governments that are doing different things for trials and things like that, whether it was 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G. Right.
Where was it in Central America where I walked into the airport and you were in the line ahead of me? What was that?
Actually, that's a funny story, but it was actually in Mexico.
Was it Mexico?
Yes.
Okay.
And you had just got an iPhone.
Yeah,
and I should have went out and bought stock, because you basically said, wow, this iPhone is something else. This is really going to be a big hit, Chris.
I should have bought stock.
Okay. Yeah, I did. So.
Yeah. Okay, any questions before we move on? Kind of keep things moving here. Nope. Okay. So commercialization, obviously we've talked a lot about trials, but we've actually got to build this, and then you've got to sell it to people and get them to buy it, right, and offer them services. So I want to dive into this a little bit more. I think this slide is for Dr. Wei, if I'm not mistaken. So if you want to walk us through how the commercialization you see in China here over the next few years, obviously there's a summary slide here, but some of the details you see, how you see moving forward.
This slide will show the 5G commercialization plan in China. And currently we are conducting the 5G technology research and development trial. And from the second half of this year, the 5G commercial trial will be launched. And China plans to start the 5G commercialization service in the 2020. And China tended to employing the standalone network, and the frequency is mid-frequency band, and it's 3.4 to 3.6 GHz and 4.8 to 5 GHz band. And because the mid-frequency band will enabling the better coverage and can support the vertical applications, such as the Internet of the vehicles and the industrial internet and other vertical application. Thank you.
So do you see it's interesting, you've got V2X, industrial internet, vertical applications. We've been talking the last few days, there's been a lot of discussion about consumer, personal. Do you see that type of service leading, or these services leading first in China?
At the initial of the commercialization of 5G, I will mainly focus on the EMBB scenarios, and then we'll extend to the IoT scenarios. Right.
Okay, good. Dr. Brito down there. You can't answer. Need to move this podium forward a little bit. You know, Brazil's got some unique opportunities here. Obviously, different challenges with the geography as well there. I was wondering if you could walk through the satellite link with 5G here, because it's not something we hear about. Usually at 5G conferences, we hear millimeter wave and dense urban, but you're taking a different view here. So I thought it was an interesting commercialization opportunity.
In terms of the remote area scenario, satellite is a very important technology to be used in the background. In the backhaul, we have in Brazil several regions with very low population density, like in Amazon region and in Midwest region. And in these regions, there are a lot of municipalities without optical backhaul, and far from the closest point with optical backhaul. Then to overcome the situation, satellite is a very important technology and must be considered as a complementary solution as backhaul for 5G networks to achieve the coverage in terms of remote areas. That is, if we want ubiquitous communications, we need to use satellite in Brazil as a complementary technology. However, to be honest, I think that in terms of commercial aspects, in Brazil and in all countries of the world, the first step is the bit pipe or enhanced mobile broadband scenario in urban area. And I think in Brazil, the first scenario implemented is this scenario too. In other words, satellite is very important for us, but it's not the first step in terms of commercial aspects.
Right. So do you see that, obviously, this remote mobile site could be also for a commercial private network with a 5G network as well, right? Do you see that opportunity developing as well, or purely for remote communities?
I think there's a lot of opportunity to new players in this kind of technology in Brazil. Yeah.
Okay, great. Dr. Satoh, so how do you see going from, you talked a lot about the concepts in the previous slide and the trials. Now we've got to go, you call it realization here, commercialization. So how do you see moving forward here?
Yes, I have already mentioned in my the previous slide our plan to commercialize the 5G mobile communication system in Japan. There will be before the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games to be held in the 2020. So considering the situation and the conditions, the 5GMF proposed the concept of the crossover collaboration in the third global 5G event held in May last year in Tokyo. As you know, well, that the crossover collaboration means seamless cooperation with no barrier between the various the industries. That means that our prospect to facilitate or accelerate the collaboration with the different the vertical players. So far, I think that we think such kind of the crossover collaboration will facilitate our commercialization of 5G in Japan. That's our the prospect and the request. Thank you.
So by crossover, you're talking with vertical industries, manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right. Yeah. That's our meaning of the collaboration. Yeah.
Right. Right. No teenagers or millennial. No. No. Okay. Just checking. Just checking. And Dr. Willcock, how are you going to sell this stuff? What are you going to build?
Do I need to sell something? I thought it was your business to sell restaurants and things. I don't think I have to do that, luckily. Yeah, I guess it builds on what was just said before by my colleague from Japan, that in the European view, 5G will only be successful if we are successful with the verticals. So if 5G just provides more of the same, if it's just LTE with new shoes, if it's just massive broadband, it's going to be a failure for everyone. Maybe you can market that, but in the end, it's not really providing anything. So for all our sakes, and also for the sakes of these vertical industries, we need to make sure it's a success for everyone. With that background, one of the key things that my organization, the 5G Infrastructure Association, has been doing is trying to make sure we interact with the vertical industries in the right way. Now, a lot of people in the telecoms world seem to think, well, frankly, they should come to us. We're so wonderful in the telecoms world, and we have such a great product. We don't need to be doing anything. And they fail to understand that it's actually a series of different worlds out there. If you take something like automotive, they see the telecoms world as a small extra add-on. But if we wait for them to come to us, it's not going to happen. So the important point is we actually firstly understand those vertical industries, but that we actually go out and we find a way to successfully interact with them. And the sort of trials that we described in the previous session and earlier in this panel, these are a good way of perhaps breaking the ice. But these are really only a first stage. We really need to understand, we need to interact. And this is what this vertical task force is about. It's about focusing on finding the right way to interact with these vertical sectors. Now, that might be going out and going to their fora, going to their standardization bodies. It might be inviting them to our standardization bodies. It might be through focused trials, and certainly in Europe, there are a number of trials, for example, on automotive, where the European Commission has created these automotive framework, these places or corridors where this activity can go on, this automated stuff, and that's a good way of doing it. But it's different for the different vertical sectors, and the different vertical sectors are at different levels of maturity. So some are very open to discuss. There are already forums around there. Some are really just starting to learn. So the key point is, when you're talking about commercialization, what is the commercial basis? This should not be a charity game. It will not work. It cannot just be empty marketing. Hey, we've got 5G first, therefore we're wonderful. That also doesn't make money in the medium term. So 5G needs to fulfill the promises that have been made, and to fulfill those promises, it's not a network or a technology we have today. The first standards have now, or will be in the near future, be stabilized, but they do not deliver the full promise of 5G. So for true commercialization, first we need to do the work to have that standard, and then we need to develop and deploy that standard. And by definition, that standard needs to support the vertical industries.
Right. So 2 quick questions. You've got manufacturing, energy, health, media, and automotive on here. You mentioned leaders and laggards in terms of verticals. Do you see these as the leaders? Are these the folks approaching you?
I guess if we want to talk about leaders, most definitely automotive is I think, one of the key leaders. And the reason for that is partly because the discussions have been going on longer with that, partly because they have been using our 4G technology quite successfully, so they have some idea of digitization. And you have things like 5G AA, which are already discussing how to solve these things. And we are using 4G technology quite successfully there. Right. So it's more the state and the cycle of those industries. If we look at the others on those pictures, I guess the next in line would probably be Industry 4.0 factories of the future, where there's a lot of work going on there. The others are perhaps a little bit further behind, shall we say, in terms of maturity.
Great, good. Okay, and Professor Lee, so obviously a lot of work happening in Korea, but how do we get to commercialization here? And you've got phase 2 on here and a lot of collaboration. So do you want to walk through this?
Okay, thank you. I think this slide is rather related with the inter-regional collaboration activity rather than this commercialization. But actually, the joint research effort support indirectly for smooth commercialization. So I'd like to say something related with the Korean commercialization plan. As Mr. Sim mentioned in morning session that we'll have auction in next month. We have 2 spectrum, 3.5 and 28 GHz. So in 3.5 GHz, the minimum auction fee will be around $2.5 billion for 10 years uses. And for 28 GHz, the minimum auction fee will be roughly $0.6 billion for 5 years. So a little bit big money compared with the previous auction in Korea, but considering larger bandwidth than previous auction, so it is some kind of reasonable. Another issue in the commercial plan is that the government had some guideline on the deployment step. So the government said that in 3 years, at least 15% coverage should be covered. And in 5 years, 30% coverage should be provided. So that is the government guideline. We believe that this is a loose guideline than previous auction for 3G and 4G, considering the higher frequency and less coverage. So that is the issue. But in June, if the auction is made, then the official license will be given start from December this year. The commercialization start from March. So its time is very tough. But we had some pre-trial already. So I think even though it is tough, but it will be possible to start commercialization in early next year. Thank you.
Okay. So I did watch the Olympics, yes, but I didn't get my tickets. No? So, okay, so Chris, I'll come back to you before we move on, and we think about questions here. Commercialization, Dr. Willcock brought up a point about vertical markets and things like this. Do we see the same? Do you see the same type of thing from your members in 5G Americas? Are you seeing the same level of activity with Ford, GM, Boeing, that type of
Yeah, the Boeing integration. No. Yeah, I mean, I think most all of our members are realizing that when you look at 5G, the equation at some point gets different. And that's not necessarily saying initially, but if you look at, in the United States, as an example, if you look at the launches, a lot of the launches are based on probably what I would consider their commercial war room strategies, partly based on things like spectrum portfolio and what markets they want to go after first, and what markets are interesting to them based on their analysis. But I think that's the initial markets that I think you see end of 2018 and beginning of 2019. As you move beyond that, I think all of our members realize that the equation gets differently. It's got to be beyond smartphones, and so that they are collaborating and trialing new things. I mean, you've seen some of our members speak today about some of the trials that they're doing and the interest that they have. But we've done papers at 5G Americas from where all the members have input on vertical markets. We'll be doing more on vertical markets. We'll also, we've done papers on the whole idea of the V2X and what V2X can mean, not just in today's sense of the world, but what it can mean into the future, down the road, as they would say, no pun intended. And so, yeah, the big answer is yes, and I think all of our members are partnering on it. And again, it's the bigger equation of 5G will be about verticals and working with other industries. The initial equation, I think, will depend on each operator's kind of war room strategies.
Okay. So, any questions? Oh, yes. Somebody run with the microphone. Run. They're coming.
My question to the gentleman from Brazil. I was wondering how you address the cost and the capacity on the satellite for using 5G. This is not costly and require a big capacity.
Could you repeat, please?
My question is using a satellite to provide 5G. There is a cost and big capacity. So how you address the cost on the satellite?
Yeah,
and the business case behind it.
Yeah, the cost of satellite solution for 5G could be a problem. In terms of nowadays in Brazil, if you compare the cost of satellite solutions with the other ones, it's not competitive. But on the other hand, if you want to make a full coverage in Brazil, we don't have another solution in terms of Amazon area and so on. In terms of capacity, I think in a remote area, we don't need the same capacity if you compare it with the urban area. Then the limitation of capacity in satellite communication is not a problem for this particular scenario. This is my opinion.
I think there's also, if you've got an island of 5G, right, you can have edge compute locally, providing applications locally without continually going over the backhaul.
We can integrate the satellite solution, use fog computing and network slicing to deliver the other scenarios in a remote area too.
Right. Good. Any other questions? Yes, this one.
Thank you very much. I'm Bernard Barani from the European Commission. I have a question for the speaker of China, because I was very much interested to see that China apparently is the only nation that immediately identifies SA, the standalone option, as the commercialization strategy, or that piggybacks on standalone, whilst the other announcements are more on the non-standalone option. Do you confirm that China wants to move immediately into standalone for commercialization, and what is and what would be the commercial advantage for doing that compared to the other nations?
You mean why China selected this as standalone? I think, firstly, I think China has a big market, and if the operators select an NSA, the non-standalone network, and then because the non-standalone network is a mid stage, and finally he have to involve into the standalone network, and because the China is a very big market, so it will spend a lot of investment, and this, I think this is one point. And another, because China attached the importance to the vertical industry, so we hope we can use the low frequency band to realize the better coverage, and so in this situation, standalone network is better. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay, I've got one for you guys. Right? You guys got to do some work as well. Let's ask them some. So we've talked about automotive as one of the first verticals. Okay. So I'm going to drive home after this. I asked this question yesterday. It's kind of interesting. I'm going to drive home after this. My car is parked 2 blocks away on the 10th floor. I'm going to walk outside, take my phone, push a button. My car is going to unpark itself and appear in front of me. I'm going to get in the back seat, and it's going to drive me home. How long from today before I can do that? Who thinks it'll be less than 5 years?
Iain, doesn't your car do that already?
No.
Oh, okay.
Unless my wife's driving. Who thinks less than 5 years?
Less than 5 years.
Less than 5 years, wow. Okay. Who thinks 5 to 10 years for that scenario? And he's a technology guy. Okay. Who thinks 10 to 15 years? Ooh.
Skepticism.
Okay. Who thinks more than 15 years, but it will happen? Is that Mark there? You got your hand up? Okay. Who thinks never, not going to happen? Iain, you're going to die before we get there. Vicky, don't put your hand up. Nobody thinks I'm going to die before it happens. Okay, interesting. So 2 skeptics over 15 years. All right. And Chris, you didn't put your hand up, and Dr. Willcock, you didn't put your hand up either, I noticed.
I put my hand up.
You were asking the audience, not us. We're not part of the audience. It's not our...
I put my hand up.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I'm following your direction.
So what do you think?
I think it's purely a legal problem. I think the technology is there today, and obviously legal problems are often tied up with politics, so it becomes very tricky.
Yeah.
I tend to feel it would be more in the 5-year time frame.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Yeah.
All right, you've earned your beer tonight. So.
Okay, I don't drink.
Let's talk about interregional activities. Actually, you're up first. Now, you've got a region that's quite interesting because I am a Brit.
Well, then you're not part of my region, I don't think so. So, yeah, you can forget that one right away. I'm also a Brit, so I shouldn't be laughing. Anyway, apparently we're still officially in the union, so I can at least give this presentation before I have to leave. Europe is actually very active and has been very active from the start in collaborating with other regions. We see there is a need for a global 5G standard. I think that's obvious to everyone. But also the European Commission especially has been putting the money where its mouth is and actually creating both the political and the technical framework to enable these collaborations. What is interesting is it sounds a very easy process. Oh, yeah, let's just have a collaboration with China or with Japan or with Korea, and let's get on and do some research together or do trials together. In actual fact, it turns out to be not quite so straightforward. And the reason here is that obviously different regions have very different governments, very different regimes for how they do funding of research, and equally trying to organize single demonstration systems or any sort of collaboration over 5,000 or 10,000 miles, or perhaps I should say kilometers if we're talking about international, is actually very challenging. And really what this slide shows is some of the solutions we've come up with for these various different regional activities. And they show various models which perhaps are interesting to be reused. So if we look at the top left-hand corner where we have these integrated 5G platforms, clearly this would be the most desirable situation. So it's very integrated. This is where we have a single platform and where we are running the 5G services on top of that, and we have then global KPIs. So we're directly able to compare the performance of the various sites. And this would be a dream, but often that is not possible. Often we have to go to a more distributed approach. And if we go to the top right-hand side, we then see something where we have two separate systems, but we interconnect those 5G platforms, typically at the core or through some sort of cloud there. So at least we're able to connect end-to-end across the region. And here again, we are able to use global KPIs and sort of understand things. If that is not possible, if we have two completely separate systems, as we do on the bottom half of this slide, then we also have different possibilities. So we see on the left-hand bottom slide where we have common KPI benchmarking. So what we try and do is we try and compare the KPIs on the two systems, and we can do then some sort of calibration to see what is going on, compare and contrast. This often has some issues, obviously, with if you're using commercial systems about the ability to share that information, but it does give at least some global view of what's going on. And that's a more sort of service-orientated, the bottom half. And then the final one in the bottom right-hand corner is where we purely try and have common services on the separate trial systems. And this is also quite interesting for comparing the user experience or the experience of whatever's using. Obviously, it's not necessarily a user when we're talking about verticals. It could be a car or a robot or something else. So that's giving some sort of overview of the landscape that we have developed from a European side when working with the other partners. And I thought that was quite an interesting view to show the sort of breadth of the sort of collaboration we are doing.
Great, good. So, Professor Lee, I found it interesting on this slide that I would expect you'd be working through other partners in Asia, but actually you've got a lot of places outside of Asia you're working with as well.
Yes, thank you. As you mentioned, that in the 6 members in the upper part of the slide are already the multilateral MOU members for this global joint event, so everybody know that. In addition to that, we had MOU with the Turkey government last year, November. And this February, we had MOU with UK, 5G. Regarding Turkey, it's a potential big market. So we made some collaboration agreement with that. And regarding UK, it's some kind of exceptional because currently the UK is a part of European Union, but from early next year, they may exit. So we think that we need to have some kind of bilateral collaboration program with the UK. So we had the MOU, the UK 5G. Previously, it was known as the UK 5G Innovation Network, but I found that recently they changed the name. In addition to that, we had some discussions with Indonesia and Malaysia because they have some potential market. I think that the upper 6 members market, I think the main goal is the timely deployment of 5G. But in lower part or some Asian or countries, I think the main goal is smooth migration from 3G or 4G to 5G. So we have some separate strategy or goal for different market segment. That is background of our collaboration plan. Thank you.
So the UK hasn't left yet, right? March 19, you never know. We'll see. Right?
We'll see.
Okay, Dr. Satoh, you mentioned crossover collaboration in one of your previous slides and working with verticals, and I pulled this out of your deck as I thought it was a really good overview of the type of things. I wonder if you could walk through this as not so much the regional, or you have got regional collaboration here, but also this crossover between the different verticals.
Yes, this slide shows the crossover collaboration among our member or the verticals within the domestic areas. However, that the inter or the cross-regional collaboration, it's also important to realize the spectrum harmonization and international standardization for the 5G system, we believe. So we have already concluded the MOU or MOC or LOI with other the 5G-related organizations by bilateral basis. In addition, we also recognize that the global 5G event based upon the multilateral MOU would be quite the appropriate place or opportunity to promote the cross-regional collaboration activity. However, we think that this scheme and procedure should be improved further in the future to accelerate our cross-regional collaboration activity. Perhaps we will discuss it further in our technical program committee tomorrow afternoon. Thank you.
So when I saw this slide, I have to ask you, but what is the cow doing with mobile broadband? Are they watching Netflix or who?
Why is the cow bigger than a tractor? That's
Why
kind
is
of
the
worrying.
What is the cow?
Not specifically the cow, but that means, as you know well, that the agriculture or something.
What's that? Sell on wheels. Okay. Dr. Wei.
Actually, this slide we list some important events in the last year about the international cooperation. And in the July last year, the program EU and China, we hosted the EU and China workshop on the 5G development and collaboration opportunities. And in the November of last year in Shanghai, MT 2020 promotion group and 5G AA signed the MOU. And our aim is to promote the Internet of the vehicle development. And in the December of the last year in Beijing, MT 2020 promotion group and 5G forum held the China-Korea 5G and V2X expert meeting. And our aim is strengthen future collaboration and several V2X and industrialization. Thank you.
Okay. Good. And Dr. Brito. So I'm going to let you finish up here because your conclusion slide, which I'm showing here, actually I thought was just a great summary of all the different activities and some of the kind of things we have to do for 5G to be successful. And obviously from a Brazilian point of view, you have different challenges. And I was wondering if you'd want to walk through, this is what you need for it to be successful for you, right?
Yeah. But I have highlighted the importance of the 5G for remote areas scenario in terms of agribusiness in Brazil. And I think another big opportunity for Brazil is the IoT scenario. I have some numbers to illustrate this importance in terms of economical impacts in Brazil. We expect to have up to 27 billion US dollars by 2025 for smart city applications in Brazil. and up to 21 billion for rural area applications, and up to 39 billions for a health application. Then IoT scenario is also a big opportunity for us. But besides the economical aspects, we have huge social problems in Brazil, and we have huge social problems around the world too. And in other words, we also need health applications in Amazon areas, and we also need IoT applications in rural areas to achieve the results that we want. Then IoT and remote area scenarios is correlated in terms of impacts for social problems and economical aspects. We are working in 5G project to make the 5G for remote area scenario feasible, and we are trying to put Brazil in sync with the rest of the world in terms of developing technologies for 5G. We believe that 5G is a big opportunity for Brazil in terms of economical aspects, and we also believe that 5G is a huge opportunity to address social problems through a real ubiquitous communications platform. Then we are working to make this a reality.
Okay, great, thank you. Chris, anything to add? Where are you spending your time these days on interregional cooperation? Where's all the activity from your perspective, sitting here in the Americas?
Well, I mean, you see the, Brazil, obviously part of the Americas, definitely in other countries. But, I mean, most of the, if you look at the United States, again, our companies and all those that are the key stakeholders are involved in cooperation activities throughout the world. Now, the United States does have some agreements, but not really as many as you probably see right down this table. 5G Americas, as you saw, was listed on many of these slides because we do have cooperation agreements with many, not just an MOU partnership, but even straightforward MOU partnerships, as well as in Latin America as well. So, it's a little different model maybe that the United States government has taken, but again, I think that's based on historicals of what has worked for them in the past and how they've done things in technology, not just wireless, but in technology.
Great. Any questions? Last questions. Okay, so every panel, oh, I'm sorry, you only get one question per day.
My question is, going through the trials, most of the guys, they focus on the throughput and the speed. Nobody talk about the slicing on the 5G, which is a very important functionality in the 5G. So, but I never see anything, nobody talk about the slicing and the way the forward of the slicing.
Okay. Anybody want to comment on network slicing? We've been talking a lot today about speeds, latency, performance, but not network slicing.
Yeah, I don't think anyone on this panel would disagree that slicing is important, but it's not the same fundamental functionality as in throughput, latency, or robustness. And so if you look at the three classical corners of the triangle for 5G, obviously network slicing isn't one of those three corners for the classic services. So network slicing does not in itself provide any unique services. It provides a unique way of provisioning the network, and as such is important. And indeed, the broader need to move away from perhaps the classical business model of user, operator, vendor, the ability to use network slicing to actually provide more access on different business models, that's definitely a given for the verticals. So in that sense, I think you're right. I think it's important.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, and I think, I disagree with Colin, and also I think, number one, it is a key component of what will be going on in 5G in the future, and you have a panel coming up, I think, with some real good experts that will be discussing network slicing, or definitely we can ask them even more questions on it.
Okay. Yeah.
If you look to the four scenarios for 5G and the requirements in terms of performance, we have different requirements, and some of them contradictory. Then I think that networks licensing is absolutely mandatory as technological solution to make 5G real, considering the 4 scenarios. If you look only for one scenario, it's not important, but if you look for the 4 scenarios, it is absolutely mandatory.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to finish up. I've got one last question. I always ask this of my panels. So some people who've been on panels before know this is coming. Chris, I'm going to start with you, and we'll go down this way. Is what keeps you awake at night? You cannot say children, you know.
Okay, this is
no personal stuff. So what is it from a 5G perspective that you think the industry is not paying enough attention to, we're going to miss, and later on it's going to come back and smack us in the back of the head, or it's going to hurt? What is it we need to be addressing that we're not talking about? Chris?
Well, first, I had the perfect answer.
Okay.
So what keeps you up at night is when your keynote address, the FCC commissioner says that they're not going to make it because of travel. So next is, as far as 5G, what are we going to miss? You know, I actually think we're really not missing anything. I think, though, what it's going to be like very similarly in certain technology areas, it's going to take more time than we expect to go into what would be considered some of these vertical industries. We will be moving away from what I would call transactional sales, which means you go to a retail outlet, or there's someone from a carrier comes out to your business to make that sell. A vertical industry sale or application is a longer sales cycle, and so it will take a longer time to actually work through that, and also work through the government regulations of things like transportation and healthcare for those vertical industries.
Okay, good. Dr. Brito, what keeps you awake at night?
For me, it's easy the answer. The remote area scenario. We need more attention in a remote area scenario. And I think also we need to think 5G as a complete integrated solution, considering the 4 scenarios and our vertical approach. In my opinion, now we are putting a lot of focus in enhancing mobile broadband communications in terms of developed solution, and we need to think the solution as an integrated, complete solution, considering the 4 scenarios.
Okay, good. Professor Lee, what do you worry about?
Okay, I think in Korea we'll have the first deployment for 5G because we have a small territory and we have light weight, so it is possible in Korea. But I think in other countries, in other regions, that may be different. For example, huge territory or huge investment in 3G or 4G will have some burden to investment of 5G. So I think each country or each region has its own migration plan for 5G. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Satoh?
Yes, from our prospect, it's also similar the observation at 5G America is that the collaboration or cooperation with the vertical industry will be the most important issue to facilitate the 5G commercialization. So far as we believe that we would like to extend our activity to facilitate the vertical industry collaboration. That's our the prospect. Thank you.
Okay, great.
I think the 5G application is a key factor of the 5G success. So we think we should deeply research the requirements of the vertical industry and take the application as a guide to promote the integration of 5G and the vertical industry.
Right. Good. Okay, Dr. Willcock, you get the last point.
And I'm not allowed to talk about children. Things that keep me awake at night, apart from children, to do with 3G. I think my key concern is that we won't deliver on the promise of 5G. And by that, what I mean is there is a rush in deployment in various different regions. And that's all well and fair, but it doesn't matter how many people are involved, it still takes 9 months to have a baby. And there is a certain time we need for the technology, and we need to develop that technology far enough that we can deliver on those promises. One of the main themes of the plenary we've just had and the various different other plenaries is verticals are really important, and we need to understand them. And at the same breath, we say, oh, yes, and we're deploying in all these areas. How can that fit? If we're not quite sure what we need, how can we deploy it today? How does that make sense? How does it make sense when 3GPP is going to have its first stable standard in June this year? And we know as a fact that it takes 18 months to 2 years before you can implement that standard. That means we have to be at least 2 years away from anyone deploying commercially a standards-compliant network. It's just standard mathematics. 1 + 1 = 2. And yet, we're hearing about all these deployments all over the place. What are they deploying? Because it can't be the standard. And my concern with doing that is you're then rolling out something that will not deliver the promises of 5G. We all know that's fine in the short term as a marketing gag, but it comes back and it bites us hard because we're then selling 5G something that is not 5G, and the user is not that stupid. At some point they'll say, oh, it's all hype. There's nothing behind it. All I get is a little 5 in my display, but the performance is rubbish. It's not going to help any of us, and that's what keeps me awake at night.
Do you sleep?
Not when I'm going through Chicago. But anyway, that's a different thing.
Okay. I want to thank the panel. I know some of you got pulled into this at the last minute because of travel and visa issues, etc. But I want to thank you all. This is good. And I think you're all around for the rest of the day. So thank you.